A lot of that feeds into a sort of cultural preconception of what it means to be a woman or a man, both in a social and in a biological sense. And I think that people feed into that. It turns into a kind of feedback loop where, you go back 1,000 years and people were doing wild stuff to demonstrate their masculinity or their femininity, like they wanted to. It felt like it was like a drive. But nowadays we've no such desire. And I think we construct the categories that we're sort of driven to walk within to an extent, and that's in a sense I think it recurs a little bit.
So when you say that, do you mean maybe
So I don't know if you caught that. He used so many weasel words there because he actually just completely contradicted himself. Because he admitted that a lot of these gender preferences and gender behaviors do have some biological basis, but then maybe the way in which they materialize, that could be the social construction, like the feet binding. And then he even said what I said, that it creates a feedback loop, okay, for people wanting to show how masculine or feminine they are.
Really?
Okay? So he understands the concept, but then he completely contradicts himself by going back to, well, therefore that means everything's a social construct, or that these categories are social constructors. Like, that's not what it means. You just admitted that you understand that these things are rooted in biology. And just because there's certain behaviors and the way they manifest, that could be the cultural construction. That doesn't mean that gender itself is a social construction, or even that someone can just change their gender on a dime.
Right. Yeah. Vaush is a complete social constructionist. He thinks everything is a social construct. Every emotion that you have is implanted in you by some ruling elite.
But that's what's so weird, because we've heard videos where he makes that exact argument, that everything is a social construct. He makes sort of the Marxian, false consciousness. The elites are implanting ideas in your head. And I'll go back because he just contradicts that entire idea right here.
Wanted to. It felt like it was like a drive. But nowadays we've no such desire. And I think we construct the categories that we're sort of driven to walk within to an extent, and that's in a sense I think it recurs a little.
Right. I
straight feed into that. It turns into a kind of feedback loop. Cultural preconception of what it means to be a woman or a man, both in a social and in a biological sense. And I think that people feed into that. It turns.
This is also just a bunch of people getting together and measuring their personal preferences and intuitions, and then creating an outcast of the person that doesn't have the same intuitions as everybody else.
Right.
Like, that's the situation. How come we're all dropping in at the skate park and you're not, is basically what's going on. Why are you different than us?
Into a kind of feedback loop where, you go back 1,000 years and people were doing wild stuff to demonstrate.
And this is just complete assertion here on Vaush's part. I can't stand it. 1,000 years ago when I was in Athens, it's like, fuck you, dude.
Well, this is an interesting debate technique that I didn't notice until watching it just here, and I don't think his audience realize it, which is that he's essentially agreeing with everything Deborah So is saying, but then his conclusion, he'll conclude it by still saying whatever he's saying, even though his conclusion doesn't fit what he just explained.
Right.
So it's like, from her perspective, it's like, well, how do you argue against that? Because it's like, well, you just agreed with me, but then you just came to a completely different conclusion based on nothing.
Right. Yeah. Optically, it's great, though.
Right.
Got to admit the optics here are definitely on Vaush's side.
Well, I think the problem is, and I've noticed this from a lot of the way that some people react to our conversations, is that there's like a percentage of the audience who you can explain something. You can take 5 minutes explaining something. Now, this isn't for anyone listening, okay?
Right.
Everyone that's listening live is a big brain genius who understands everything I'm saying, okay?
Right. But occasionally there's someone in the comments.
Occasionally there's some dirty, watchbacker who doesn't understand. But no, I've noticed that sometimes in these conversations with our, on our streams and in a lot of other streams, someone could take 5 minutes to explain something, and the audience will will miss or not understand or not track the explanation, because people are half listening, they're playing video games, they're doing whatever they're doing while they're listening to the stream, but then they'll just hear the conclusion and they'll say, okay, that person agrees with me. And it kind of feels like Vaush is banking off that. He'll give an explanation where he explains how he basically agrees with everything Deborah Soh is saying, but then his conclusion will be different, and his audience won't realize that he's just completely contradicted his entire position on this stuff.
They're not following the argument.
Right.
And he's not explaining the argument, obviously.
They're masculine.
The argument's the most fun part, Sitch. I don't understand.
Or their femininity, like they wanted to. It felt like it was like a drive, but nowadays we've no such desire. And I think we construct the categories that we're sort of driven to walk within to an extent, and that's in sense I think it recurs a little bit.
That's the bullshit face right there. Did they buy it? That's the did they buy it face, don't you think? That was just a load of bullshit I just spilled out.
Yes.
It's so much more fun when you know a topic inside and out. I love when we debate people on the critical race theory stuff, because you're just on it. You've got all your little quotes from all the sources. Oh, it's so good. It's so good when you know the topic way more than you do.
Yes.
And they're just forced into bullshit mode. Deborah Soh knows this topic inside and out. Vaush is not even really engaging on the topic.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the way to counter what Vaush is doing, and would have been for Deborah to do, but she's not like a debater or anything. And I think she's just asking.
She called this video debating Vaush on gender and ideology.
I guess you're right. She did.
She typed that in.
Right. But I'm not saying that she herself, to my knowledge, she doesn't have some experience debating people. And she's just kind of asked him for most of the conversation these kind of broad questions. I think the way to counter what he's doing, if you realize that he's doing it, is that she would have to ask him very specific questions like, well, wait a minute. It sounds like you agree with me. What is
point it out.
Right. So, but then you have to figure out like, okay, where's the difference, or if there is a difference, and be like, okay, well, do you think that the fact that men engage in riskier behavior is biological? Do you think the fact that men are more aggressive is biological? Do you think that there are more men in certain fields like, programming or biology? Like, you need to actually get into very specific avenues. You have to make Vaush take a position on specific issues and not kind of hide in generalities.
That's exactly what I did when I debated him. I was like, this is the perfect opportunity to ask questions like that.
Right.
But no. Yeah, it would be much better if she dug in on those things. I think that Vaush would say that even all of those things are complete social constructs. Just when I asked him that
I think
question,
he would try to like do this middle ground thing he's doing with her, where he's trying to say, oh, some of it's biology, some of it's not, who can
I don't
say
think so.
It's feedback.
Maybe he tried to bullshit his way out of it, is what you're saying?
Yeah, essentially.
So when you say that, do you mean
it feels like, because
she's asking a question right now. Maybe we spoke
Right.
too soon.
Right. But I don't think she does ask the question I'm talking about. But it feels like when he watched her on Joe Rogan and he did his video by himself, he took very strong positions. And then it feels like now that he's talking to her, he's sort of walking, like he's researched the topic more. And he knows that he can't get away, since she's literally like, a sex researcher. He can't get away with making sort of the hyperbolic statements he made, when he was just in his own, talking to his chat, basically.
He does ask her if she's a doctor, and she's like, yes, I am a doctor.
Right.
Which is pretty badass.
maybe society pushes people to veer off to one direction or the other?
Yeah, I think so. What a masculine man is today, I mean, I don't know, think Vin Diesel. I think many kinds of masculine men, but just think Vin Diesel, right? Vin Diesel as an archetype wasn't around in ancient Greece, but men.
Why is that funny?
He said Vin Diesel as an archetype didn't exist in ancient Greece. That's a bafflingly stupid statement. First of all, obviously Vin Diesel specifically didn't exist as an archetype because of this thing called the linear progression of time. Okay. But broadly, the archetype of Vin Diesel, like the buff, stereotypically masculine and male who does all the action stuff, was of course an archetype that existed in ancient Greece. It's an archetype that's existed in every culture forever.
Right.
What the fuck is he talking about?
Well,
You know
I don't
who Vin
what he
Diesel
means
was in
by it.
ancient Greece? A guy named fucking Hercules. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
The most masculine of masculine men who
They
went
didn't-
around punching hydras.
They didn't get Vin Diesel to play Hercules. They got Brad Pitt, but same thing, basically.
No, Brad Pitt was Achilles.
Oh, he was. You're right.
Right. Achilles is another perfect example. Achilles, was the same archetype, the undefeatable masculine, warrior guy.
Yeah.
Like, that's such a bafflingly weird statement for him to say that the archetype of Vin Diesel didn't exist. Of course it existed. Of course it existed. I couldn't, when I heard this, I was trying to think, was there an archetype today that's associated with a gender that didn't exist historically back then? And I couldn't think of one.
Yeah. All the Greek myths are based on different attributes: wisdom, beauty, narcissism. There's all these different human attributes that there was a god devoted to.
The stereotypical masculine male, that's one of the foundational archetypes of human history.
Zeus.
And I was thinking, okay, today, here's something you say maybe didn't exist in ancient Greece. Someone like David Bowie. Okay, you have sort of the effeminate, but male singer who lots of women, especially young women, are attracted to.
Right.
And we see this kind of a lot, especially a lot more in our society. And then I thought, wait a minute, that archetype did exist in ancient Greece. And I thought there's the whole story about Orpheus, Orpheus is this famous lute player whose music was so amazing and so enchanting, and all the women loved him. And he wasn't Hercules. He wasn't going around punching monsters. He was sort of like this literally an effeminate musician, but still male, that appealed to women, seemed to exist even back then. So I couldn't literally think of some of these archetypes that are new today that don't have some root, in our history.
Everything's brand new. We've just come up with these, Sitch.
Okay.
And testosterone was, I think that today there are men with a strong biological predisposition towards achieving something. And when they want that something, they look at media and they say, oh, well, Vin Diesel's a guy I can look at. That's an archetype worth pursuing. That option wasn't available back 2,500 years ago. So maybe there are different.
They didn't have mentorships 2,500 years ago. Sitch, did you know that? You couldn't look at other people achieving success. That was not a thing. Did you get that?
I didn't know that.
Being able to look through a screen, maybe you couldn't do it, but there was this thing called reality. You could look at them.
Different avenues. They would look at the legends of Achilles. I'm not a great scholar of the classics, but
Achilles is the same archetype as Vin Diesel. What the fuck are you talking about? I don't understand.
I think to an extent, and maybe the masculinity, the underlying testosterone, the hormone washes, they drive both of those things. But obviously, we play a huge hand in determining where that road goes.
He just said nothing. Did you catch that?
We play a huge hand socially.
Because this is why this conversation is so weird. He just says, yes, the hormone washes, create the aggressive behavior, blah, blah, blah. But then we, society has a hand in where those go. It's like, oh, okay. No, that's not what the gender activists are saying, Vaush. Okay. That's what Deborah So is saying. That's not what the gender activists are saying.
Yeah, culture does shape the biological intuitions. Yes.
Of course.
Right. He's saying culture is running the show, though. He would say culture is more than 50% of it.
He would if he was talking to not a doctor who's a sex researcher.
Right.